The Tale of Eros and Psyche. To look at a person and see a work of art. To be desired, to feel a hunger for a person, not a food. That is my mischief and plot. Affection and want, arrows shot, and two become one with love. I am the god of that carnal desire, love and lust made flesh. From the adulterous coupling and passionate affair of beauty and war, I am the child of Aphrodite and Ares. A son and servant of my mother, I am Eros, named after my elder, the primordial god Eros. He is the life urge, the will to procreate. But I am the joy, the pleasure in act. I push mortals into lust. I form relationships and just as easily break them. The heart wants what the heart wants after all. I am desire, chaos, and entertainment. Mortals and gods bend to the will of my arrows. My mother and I laugh. Our schemes that break mortals are too fun to stop. What is the world without passion? And passion is best proved through wild acts and huge spectacles, and I relish in my gifts, using them to spite and make fools of all. All must bend down to the power of love. I had thought myself above it, never to be shackled by my own gifts. Oh, how wrong I was. But love makes fools of us all, even the great Cupidos himself. It all started with a name, whispered first amongst the mortals. Then the nymphs and lower deities began to recite it too. I paid it no heed, much too busy making the king of the gods fall for another mortal woman. But the name was repeated more and more, until it came to the house of Aphrodite. In a palace near the ocean from which she was born, the sea foam of Uranus on the earth and waters, she made her home by them, and, like the waters, she was temperamental. Aphrodite herself, like crashing waves, ranting on and on, loud and screaming, then quiet and repeat, as rhythmic as the waves themselves. She screamed to all that would hear about this mortal with the name Psyche. I hadn't seen mother rage at others like this in quite some time. Not since a net that trapped her with a lover, and not for a mere mortal. But this Psyche had made quite a splash. All the people from her city, even mortals from other cities, gathered from far and wide to see her famed beauty for themselves. Calling her Aphrodite incarnate, the great goddess of beauty born again. Psyche made no claims herself, but that did not matter, for all praise went to her, and was deprived from the real goddess. Aphrodite's own temples and altars were forgotten, bare and beginning to gather only dust. With worship lost to the mortal, my mother ranted and raved, screamed and cursed, and my curiosity grew. What mortal could compare? How beautiful must this Psyche be? To move nations, I wondered, and my mother interrupted, calling me to heed her. Her jealousy oft requires others to cater to it. With the mischief she brings, I happily oblige. She ordered me to seek out this Psyche, and I did not need much convincing. Find she who claims a goddess's name, to bring her down to the level she belongs, and punish her. I was to find the most foul and hideous of men, and make this Psyche fall in love with them. Aphrodite laughed at her own cleverness, thinking her plan so brilliant. The people would see her love a hideous thing and laugh, stripping her of the praises she received, revealed to be the lowly mortal she is. A goddess could never love a beast. I smiled tightly and laughed on cue, but itched with curiosity. Barely dusk, I flew from my mother's domain. Across the earth I soared towards the city of Psyche's residence. She was a princess, the youngest of 3. Under cover of night, I landed on the column of her balcony, and sliding down, I slipped into her chamber. I could not resist seeing her up close. I had to see this prize. So beautiful. It could not be, surely. Mortality is no match for the divine. I walked silently to her bed, soft material covering the edges like a canopy of leaves. I brushed one curtain to the side with the edge of my wing. I hesitated. What if she be ugly? And what if she was really beyond the beauty of the gods? I pulled the curtain away and let out a breath as I laid eyes on Psyche. She was more beautiful than I had imagined. It was a face to match the gods. Even in sleep, she seemed an angel not of the world, something ethereal and yet mundane, still mortal but close to divine, close to perfection. I leant in closer, my breath ghosting over her skin. She jolted and turned over in her sleep. I had to snap back to avoid her body. Pain, sharp and unexpected, stabbed into my thigh. The shift too sudden. My eyes became blurred and my head spun. As I looked at Psyche once more, she seemed to glow. Her imperfections only made her more beautiful to me. I felt at my sore leg, checking the wound. I grasped at an arrow wedged in my flesh. One of my own arrows of love, from the quiver that hung at my belt. I had placed it the wrong way, a mistake that sealed my fate. I felt my heart rush. The sight of Psyche made my blood pound and my palms sweat. A swarm of butterflies thrashed in my stomach. I ran back to the balcony with one last look at the mortal. My heart ached for the first time. The thought of leaving her created odd feelings in me, a twisting in my chest, a weight in my stomach. I did not understand. I jumped into the night and took flight. My wings took me home to my valley, to my own palace. I was left to ponder the predicament I had placed myself in, cursed to suffer as I had made others suffer with love. It all felt too much. It only hurt as I watched her from afar, disguised in the throngs of people that came to witness her. We all admired her beauty. She was praised by all from a great distance. Her older sisters gained suitors, proposals, and husbands, but Psyche, the youngest, could find no lover of her own, all by design. I would not allow it. Any man who went near Psyche soon found themselves in love with other women. The attempts at matches would come for an afternoon to meet her, and reject any proposal the next day. Her father would gush at the power of beauty to overwhelm, for that must be the reason. None could think themselves worthy to be her match. But none of the mortals knew of the arrows that found her potential matches. Each infatuation or fancy was squashed by my hand, replaced with true love of another, and these men would happily leave Psyche in the dust. So, she was the last of her sisters, left entirely alone. For I could not bear the thought of her with another. The king fretted, Psyche worried, and the kingdom was afraid. If Psyche could not make a match, it was the will of the gods, and they were displeased. Afeard of the punishment that might come, and longing for a solution, they visited an oracle. I followed them. My mother's commands were long forgotten by me. I was focused on my own desires. They went to the oracle of Mycelium, worshipper and follower of the god Apollo. When Psyche and the king begged for answers, asking if she would ever be wed, had the gods been offended? What was to become of Psyche? The words the oracle spoke in return were all from the tongue of Apollo. He is no friend of mine. My tricks of unrequited loves were never taken in jest, but in rage. Through the mortal's mouth, he told them her future. Psyche must be adorned for wedlock dread, and set on lofty mountain rock. Renounce all hope, one of mortal stock will be thy son-in-law. For she shall wed a fierce, barbaric, snake-like monster. He, who flitted on wings aloft, makes all things smart, plaguing each moving thing with torch and dart. Why Zeus himself must fearful be, for other gods for him their terror show, and rivers shudder in the dark realms below. Psyche stood, frozen with the knowledge of her fate. The king gasped out and hugged his child. He knew now she would be doomed to the underworld, the river Styx in Hades. But I was a cacophony of emotions and thoughts. The revelation that she may be mine, that fate had destined something for us. The anger at her unfounded fear of me. All because Zeus paints me a villain in his words. Zeus does not fear me, but is often frustrated. But I know he enjoys the hunt, the chase, and I can be a shield, a good excuse to use with Hera. He is amused and loves the adventures I bring, but clever, snake-like monster. For I am known to lie and do the venomous bidding of my mother, the snake that turns passions away from commitment. But in his hateful words rang a truth. She was a mortal, and I was a god, winged and divine, in the shape of a man, but far beyond. What hope was there for us? She would die as Apollo foretold. Our fates were linked. Her blood would be on my hands, whether she lived for a year or 80 more. Relationships between mortals and gods rarely end well. I see it every day. I would be forced to watch her die. He took his spite of me and used it to scare the poor mortals. As I flew away, my mind wandered further. Before death, we would have to meet. I saw presenting myself to her, the mortal girl before the god of love. She would look upon my face, my wings, the shine of my divinity, and she would drop to her knees and worship me, as all mortals worship gods. What hope do I have of her seeing past that, seeing me? People have worshipped my beauty since the day I was born. Gods and mortals have been dazzled by me. The bow and arrows, my torch to light the world around me with love. They all fall over one another, driven by lust, and that is all I have ever indulged in, ever felt myself. Desire, not love. Psyche would see me and be filled with it. Yet I did not want it. I did not want to look into her eyes and see awe, the devotion of one lower looking up, the fear in the edges that never quite leaves. She would know the god of love, Eros, but never me, the man behind the divine art. It made me sick to my stomach. I would not have her see me as above. I am always above, and I am grown tired of it. Empty desire. I wanted to know her, and for her to know me, truly, beyond the hierarchy of the universe, without our places in the world binding us. Beauty others always believe to be a blessing, but it is also a curse. Constant lies and sycophants. They say anything for approval on the chance it would lead to affection. There is no true connection. Even as she said she was pleased, she could grow to be jealous and mad, angry at the thought of the worshippers and followers, my own power in the world, and the needs of my role to inspire passion, to be kept away from her for duty's sake. How could a mere mortal believe herself worthy in comparison? I did not want to plague her mind, to have it weigh on her. I feared that she would never speak the truth, become a liar, never letting her true colors show, always trying to please the great god of love. I did not want her changed. I did not want her afraid. I did not want another liar. Psyche and her family prepared her to be wed, but all that were present were mournful. Sure, she was being sent to her death. The royal procession had all the material elements of a wedding march, yet all the mood of a funeral. Every person that joined and trailed behind her was silent, serious and solemn. They gained more people as they walked, mortals, citizens and worshippers, hundreds upon thousands. Many held candles and muttered prayers for Psyche. I wished they were not so desolate. The hopelessness of them as they marched up the mountain, but selfishly, I was eager for their goodbyes. Watching from the clouded skies above, I watched as the hordes of lights all departed, as if to leave her alone. Instead, they gathered round her. Her limbs stood tall and her head remained high. She showed no fear at the high cliff face, with the dark chasm below. She soothed her sobbing parents. It only made them weep harder, clutching one another when she let them go. She held her sisters tightly, and tightly smiled at the crowds, intimate with her sisters, but distant yet warm to the people. Through the threats to her own life, the prophecy of its end, Psyche focused on all around her instead. I saw it all, perched on a rocky ledge, obscured from mortal sight. They soon all departed. Flickering lamps became faint, like fireflies on the horizon. She was alone then, and this was when her fear finally showed through. Her arms wrapped around herself in the cold winds. She allowed herself to shiver and become smaller. Her body crumpled in on itself. When all the lights had faded and the dark was closing in, her strong expression dropped. Her steady shoulders began to shake, and her eyes scanned the shadows as she began to cry. It was then I sent the winds. Zephyrus, the great west wind, went to her. Imperceptible to mortal eyes, his air encompassed her, raising the train of her bright dress playfully. I made sure he would be gentle, do his best to calm her and soothe her. He whispered to her to trust him, to step into the air, for he would catch her and bring her safely to her new home. She dried her tears, but all she could see was darkness below. Deep down from the clear cliff face and mighty drop, she could see nothing with her eyes. I could see her hesitance, her hands and feet holding her back, eyes straining to see anything in the abyss. She was searching for some beast to emerge, I'm sure, but then she focused on the horizon, to the distant city and the family that could be punished. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. I fear she would march back to the city alone, but she leapt off the edge. Zephyrus caught her with his wings and placed her gently on the ground. She could not feel or see any of the divine in my valley and in my palace, but their voices she could hear. The grand manor and sprawling landscapes, wildflowers and fields with perfect dazzling sunlight. She explored it all, taking her morning to walk amongst the flowers. When she was tired of admiring the butterflies around noon, she turned towards the house. Her first steps inside, her shoes echoed on the mosaic floors. My unseen servants were voices, more like music and chimes, sweeter than mortal voices. They all greeted her with such warmth as I had commanded, but they relished the new presence. Psyche was guided on a tour of her new home, and my staff hailed the new lady of the house, showing her this small kingdom of her own. It is true, I wished to dazzle and show her the gift before her, not a curse. She was no prisoner or sacrifice to some beast, but a most welcome and respected guest. I hoped this would ease her fears, bring her some comfort in the wake of her prophecy, show her the truth of my intentions. But it overwhelmed her. She searched for the sources of the voices. Confused and afraid, she ran from room to room. My servants calmed her, settled her enough with song. They drew her a bath and left her to the warm water. I had ordered a full dinner of different dishes and flavors, an extravagant feast to learn her favorite foods. I spoke to her for the first time, my voice disguised, deep but soft, echoing around our private room. Be welcome, Psyche. You are now lady of this house, as the fates decreed. Rest, put a mind at ease. None shall harm you. Let the bath warm you, and whenever you are hungry, there will be a feast downstairs. Anything your heart desires, we shall endeavor to make. I am the master of this house. I wish you no harm, and we shall meet at dusk. When the light has left this valley, I will come to you and explain all. I departed then out of the valley and across the world. I saw to it that my work did not go neglected. As I flew, uniting lovers, starting passionate affairs, my thoughts remained with Psyche. I rushed through my usual mischiefs, hurried past all my usual relish. I flew circles over my own home, waiting for the last rays of Apollo's chariot to leave. When Nyx, the cover of night, settled around me, I sped to my own balcony. But as I went to her chambers, I hesitated. What if she were like all the others, admiring my beauty, not really seeing me? I was surrounded by sycophants and flatterers, the vanity of mortals, the vapidity of my mother's court. It was inescapable, suffocating to be loved for just my beauty. I wanted more. I wanted to trust her. As I entered her room, I snuffed out all the lights with a thought. In the darkness, I asked Psyche if she would allow our love to blossom unencumbered or stifled. I asked her to follow some rules to be as man and wife. She would have her every need tended to, not having to labor or worry. I vowed then to love her with every fiber of my being, and swore if she agreed, we would be happy. We would be faithful and equal to one another on one simple condition. She and I would meet in darkness only, never knowing my true name and face. Before she spoke, I explained that I would tell her all but the superficial, the unimportant, but every thought, every desire, every wish for my future, our future, anything she wished to know would be hers, all but my name and my face. She would know the true man beneath. She seemed calm, but her face then dropped. All expressions were clear to me in the pitch black, but she hid nothing. She thought I could not see, but I saw her fear return with a cloud of confusion. I took her hand in mine, allowing her to feel my skin. No scales, no monstrous claws, just human hands. We sat in pitch blackness together and just felt each other's hands. The electricity she caused with every brush of her skin on mine was more than I had ever felt before. We traced the lines of each other's palms, small scars on her thumb from cutting flowers with stolen knives when she was young, calluses from the thousands of arrows I've shot from my bow. We talked almost all of our wedding night, learned about one another, small things at first, our favorite foods and flowers. I told her my love of honeyed dates, small and insignificant. I proclaimed them the best of foods across the earth. She disagreed. I fell for her more as she spoke of her love of simple fruits. According to her, they were far superior to a date. No one had disagreed with me openly in so long. It was refreshing and intoxicating. Our conversations flowed easily. Each laugh I coaxed from her caused my face to heat. I never blushed, and yet she brought them out in me. Before the light of dawn, she had leant forward and kissed me. A whispered agreement, a promise to be mine, and we molded together as one, sealing our bond as husband and wife before Nyx departed the valley. I flew from our balcony as she slept soundly in bliss. This is how it was for a time. Wedded harmony. Psyche would spend her days in the valley, the voices tending to the house, entertaining the mortals with my antics of love and lust, and showing my face at my mother's court, spending long hours in the night bonding with my wife. My Psyche's face is just the start of her beauty. I knew of her soul, her wit, her unrelenting kindness and understanding. All made me love her more. But she grew quiet and tired. Though she was surrounded by the divine, she could only hear, never see them, and never touch them. Her light, her happy demeanor began to dim. Her laughs became short, less of the melodic music I had come to love. Her questions edged around the forbidden topics, and she craved my presence more, asking why must I leave every day by Helios's rising, unable to sleep at night for her loneliness. I had not thought of it then. She longed for companionship, and spoke of old memories more often, tales of her home, the kingdom full of kind people, her father and mother, her older sisters, from when they were small squabbling children, until they were the grown women they became. But now I know it was homesickness that ailed her spirit. She was happier. A light returned to her when she spoke of those days, but then she would fade again. Her restless mind wandered. She would think aloud. What had become of them now? Did they mourn her? Day after day, night after night, I ordered servants to bring her all manner of delights, foods, wines, books, and art. They played music and brought animals for her to fill her days with, horses for the fields, and a few dogs to fill the halls with noise. I brought a flock of butterflies to wake her at dawn. They were her favourite. They had never failed to bring a smile to her face in all the moons I'd known her. Yet it was not enough. She still longed for her old home. That night she did not laugh, never even cracked a smile. I feared she was lost to me. But she came to me that night nervous as the very first. I had not seen her like this in some time. I coaxed her and dared her to reveal her desires. For anything in my power, I would do. She was my joy, and I wished to see her light and happy.
My love, I have spent every day trying to be happy. You bring me so much joy, yet I cannot help but be discontent. There are so many gifts to our home, but the unseen servants make me feel alone. Every night I am filled with bliss to be by your side, but every morning it is so empty. And in that solitude, I have much time to think. I think of all I have left behind, my family, my sisters, and the city. They all believe me dead, mauled by some beast or worse. I cannot bear the thought of their grief, wasted while I am perfectly well. I wish to take their pain away. I thought to write to them, but they would never believe ink over flesh. They had left me themselves, and they would need to see my face to know I am truly well and alive. I ask this of you, some way to tell my people that I am safe, that I am happy even, that my restless heart will be at peace once more.
I feared what harm the mortals might do, but could see no reason to deny her. Her dark eyes were penetrating my spirit, even though she could not see. Her gaze held above my eyes, where she thought they may be. I could not resist any chance to stop her anguish. I allowed her to leave, for I also believed this to be an opportunity to test her loyalty. My Psyche. She had never expressed a wish to leave me, yet she had never been given the chance either. I wondered if given the chance to leave, would she take it? My love was no prisoner, but the wind would not lift her above this valley, its cliff walls penning all inside it. With this, I allowed her to go and see her sisters. I told her I would summon them to the cliffs above, and she would be taken by the winds to meet them, for then she would have her chance. I knew I should not test her, but my mother's influence clouded my vision then. Psyche was my first love. I had to know if she'd be true. This would be a small step to showing me it was. At dawn, I summoned servants to send letters to the sisters, explaining how Psyche lived and longed to see them, to meet at the cliffs on the morrow. I told Zephyrus of his orders to be careful and listen closely, even with my eyes everywhere. I was nervous as I left her at dawn's light. I flew with knots and weight in my gut, dragging me down all day. I circled the palace, and Zephyrus came to me, whispered of all he had heard. But most concerning were the words spoken as they left. He saw them come from my home, and with their fine dresses and new jewels, gifts from my wife. No trouble, but the scowls on their faces once she had left were. My unease grew as Zephyrus continued. The sisters laughed at Psyche's stories, sure that her husband is a god. They had heard the whispered voices, seen the opulence of our home, and felt the winds themselves carry them. They were no fools. Sneering derision was clear in their tones, and they complained of their own elderly and ailing husbands. They could not stand it. The youngest daughter had lived, and with a better life than they. Bitter and petty, full of vile words. They insulted my wife, placed the gifts from her in pockets, and swore none would know of her fortune. What was a beautiful life and wealth if all still thought her dead? They went on about her, speaking of her prophecy and how she would die soon. It seemed they wished it, but Zephyrus could no longer hear their screeching, only fake tears, practice for their parents. I flew to the balcony without a word to the royal winds. I was panting by the time I arrived on our balcony. I searched through my chambers, and then hers, walking through the corridors. Searching, I became more frantic until I found her. She had not left. She was throwing up in a bowl in the kitchen. I waited for her to return to our chambers, where the darkness would hide my face. As she returned, I helped her to our bed and brought a cold compress to her forehead. She lay on the bed, and I lay beside her. I pressed my hand to her back and rubbed circles in to ease her pain. Even in the darkness, she shone to me. I brushed her hair away from her face, and she leant into my touch. Her cheek brushed my palm. I sighed with relief, basking in the peace before the clouds were revealed to her. We were headed for a storm. I whispered to her gently, "Psyche, my love, your sisters."
Yes, my sweet. I cannot thank you enough. It has brought much relief to see them, to hug them, to ease all longing I have felt. It is like a weight has been lifted from me. I can breathe and know there is no grief for now. They will tell mother and father of our happy union. The only bother now is this strange sickness. I'm content to know you as you are. In the darkness, not seeing your face, it is no bother to me now, as it once was. I take comfort and pleasure to know you trust me, and for that I love you all the more.
I had longed to hear this from her lips and told her, "Yes, I trust you, my butterfly. I cannot take your family from you. This has done you good. I can see it, but you must listen to me. You may love them, but you cannot trust them. Do not let their words twist you. They do not have your happiness at heart as I do. You must trust me. They know nothing. The wind hears their true intent. I will not repeat their words, but put your faith in me, and all will be well. Come, let me hold you and ease your pains."
But, my love, I know my sisters. We are of the same blood. They have known me all my life. We were girls together. They would never wish ill upon me. Whatever the wind, the Lord Zephyrus heard. He must not have understood. They have sharp tongues to protect their soft hearts, as Father always said. It is not in my heart to lie, so it cannot be in theirs. I cannot conceive of it. I will speak to them myself. All will be clear. They will have been jokes, just jests, and all shall be well again. You will see. Believe in me for all our time in darkness. The night is no longer a place of nightmares, no longer oppressive to me. For you are my light to which I cling, and have I not been steadfast? Trust in me, your own dedicated and devoted one, Psyche.
I trust in you, my dear, but I hope you cling to two lights. I know the source of your ailment. You are with child. I hear its heartbeat. I press my palm to her abdomen. She placed her hand on mine, squeezing my fingers. She leant up and kissed me through her smile. In our embrace, I felt her tears wet my own cheeks. In my shock, blinded by joy, I forgot all of Psyche's sisters. The storm was not on the horizon as I thought. It was already upon us. In the vipers I was supposed to call family. But I did not know the tragic events to come, nor their influence in it all. I should have seen the signs the night after their second visit, in Psyche. The way she froze under my hand, the strain in her muscles, her racing heart. It was all there, but I could not see. I thought them her nerves, the daunting ordeal of motherhood, the fear of it all settling into her. I thought we were feeling the same, I admit. I was nervous, afraid of the new life to come, and all the ways I could fail my child. But my joy also clouded my judgment. I thought her eager to be man and wife, and she melted into my kiss, as she always had. We shared a loving passion, and after our embrace, we held one another still. The warm night air was filled with fragrant flowers, and I fell into a deep sleep. I dreamt of my child, but I was woken. Red-hot pain, and I burst my eyes open. A flaming light met them as I felt my shoulder sting. I heard the sizzle and smelt the burning oil before I saw it. It mixed with golden ichor blood. It oozed from my flesh. When my eyes adjusted to the bright light, I saw Psyche stood beside me. I saw her eyes shone brown with golden flecks, the first time I'd ever seen the color. Her cheeks were flushed pink, and she stood almost frozen. I looked down, and Psyche held the lit oil lamp in one hand, and in the other, a long silver dagger. I felt my insides broke like glass. I snatched the lamp from her grasp, the pain in my shoulder ignored with the searing rage in me. Fire burst beside us, and I threw it to the stone floor. It shattered with a flurry of broken glass and sparks. Flames ate the wooden frames, and the sound shook Psyche from her statue stance. I clamped my hand on her wrist before she could blink, tore the knife from her hand and threw it across the room. It landed in the middle of a solid rock wall with a crack. She shook and fell to the floor as I let her go. I walked towards the dagger, still in shock, but it remained embedded in the rock. I said then, "After all I have done, all I give to you, I asked you so little, and even that you cannot do. You swore to me, and I loved you truly. For that, you tried to kill me in our own bed. I should kill you for this. You tried to kill your own husband. Even still, I cannot hurt you, and I will not kill you. But I cannot forgive this betrayal. I warned you, Psyche. I told you to believe in me, and yet you do not. You swear to me, and yet it means nothing. I hope you are satisfied with your discovery, for you now know what you have lost forever. You shall live and regret your losses. That is more punishment than death." I raised my wings, but I felt the wounds from the oil were scorching through the feathers. My left wing burnt and bleeding. I pushed on. I flapped toward the balcony over Psyche's head. My clumsy wings dipped low and allowed Psyche to grab onto my leg. She begged, pressed her tear-stained cheek to my leg, but I could not hear her over the tempest. Waves of emotion flooded through me, for gods feel more intensely than mortals. I flew out of the window above our home across the valley. My flight was difficult with Psyche on my legs, shaking. I could not bear to look at her. On I flew. My erratic flapping was far from my own domain now. I dropped lowly in the skies, close to the treetops, and shook my leg. Pain racked my wing, but Psyche's grip failed. She fell for a mere moment, and the tree branches caught her. I flew onwards, with the fading echo of her screams in my ears. Their piercing sound has not left my mind since, and I will never forget it. If I focus, I can still feel my ears ringing with the sound. I only thought of that as I glided towards a place of rest, to heal my burns, my wounded wing and broken heart. I fell in sorrow to my mother's domain.
My husband left me in the treetop. I had to climb down through the tears, though they racked my body. All I could do was wish to wake up, for this had to be a nightmare. He had left me alone. My mind was still reeling with the truth of who he was. It could not be true. I walked to calm my nerves, to follow the path he took in the skies on foot. On and on I walked, crying out my sorrow, until all my tears were dry, and yet I did not stop. I walked with my thoughts, for none truly knew the depth of the doubt my sisters had sown. How their words had stuck to my mind and polluted the memories of my husband. I must explain what led me to stand above him that night with the lamp and the dagger. The prophecy once told by that oracle had haunted my every moment since. When I first came to Eros, he was a voice and a shadow. I was relieved. He did not seem to be the monster that was foretold. I let myself believe it was not true. The oracle had misinterpreted the fate's design. Even though they spoke of my death, they warned that he would be the cause. I let myself forget. To sink into all of his sweet words, his loving embraces, and think myself safe. The night became like wishes and dreams. My days started with explorations. Walks in the lands, afternoons in the meadows with the finest flowers, feasts at dawn, noon, and dusk, all far greater than any mortal feast, even the feasts of my royal father. It was a relief to plunge into the darkness, carried gently to a new life. I had thought myself doomed to Hades. I had said goodbye to my old life. Few get the chance to do that. But the look in my parents' eyes, the sorrow on my sisters' faces, it remained imprinted on my mind. Even inside the crowds, faces of sympathy, pity, and a hollow resignation, all powerless to stop it. They had marched me to my doom. I did not forget the crowds that gathered for me in their hundreds, but they left long before my family. Their last looks had frightened me. I then thought of their futures and how I would never know them. In the long days of endless chatter in my new house, I would find myself still empty. My days seemed pointless, the nights my only comfort. I missed the true presence, the weight of another body in a room with you. When dawn would come, I set myself tasks. Some days to see a part of the valley I had not seen before, collect fruits and flowers till my limbs hurt and the baskets were full to the brim. Even reading and playing instruments left in a grand music room, it brought no comfort, no satisfaction as it did before. The animals Eros gifted me eased me some. My days were far more full with their company and the care required. Feeding, walking, I needed the distraction, and he knew it too. I grew to love them. Barks and meows, horses that took my exploration further, but always inside the valley. Yet I still thought of them, my family. I wondered what they were doing. As I ate breakfast, I remembered how my sisters would fight over dishes. At dinner, I wondered if they ate my mother's favourite soup for the season, or if she had found a new favourite, one I wouldn't know. I imagined them in the dining halls with me, as I ate alone, in the various empty chairs of the long table. What had become of them? What had become of my family's city and the kingdom? The flashes of my father's tired eyes were the worst. To see his anguish laid plain, the toll my fate had taken on him. For weeks it ate at me, as I tried to push it away. The distractions of my loving husband and the many needy animals did not stop my mind. I felt more and more alone. I took to keeping to my chamber and slept all day. The weight of it had taken over me, exhausted by constant fret over my family's unknown fates and their ignorance of mine. I wallowed and I felt sickness grow. Breakfast never stayed in my stomach long, more fatigues. Smells and tastes were all strong and wrong. It felt awful, the cycles of vomiting. My days were the worst, nights not so bad. But was it down to the symptoms or the comforting warmth of my husband? He would rub circles on my back, but by morning light, always I was alone, and it all pushed me further into my longing for home. My parents, nursemaids, just a single person from home to sit beside me. Unseen voices were all beautiful, but otherworldly, and made the space feel more empty. This is why I asked my love to allow me to reveal myself to my sisters, to ease this dreaded cloud of suffering that choked me so. He had always met me with kindness and understanding. This was no different. The day they came, they oohed and ahed as I showed them my domain. The expansive landscape, the glorious house, and the unseen servants. It blew them away, but I was just pleased to see them. I did not notice their lingering eyes on all the gold, the jewels, the arts around us, the spectacle of the place. But in their faces, I did see a hollowness. Lines I do not remember wore heavily on their skin. I had thought it was my fault, that my loving, if sharp, elder sisters had worried, that their mourning had scarred their faces. But they seemed so warm and light after our visit. They hugged me tightly goodbye, and I felt that relief I had so desperately been seeking. I watched the winds of Zephyrus carrying my sisters back up and went happily back to my home. I had evaded their questions with necklaces and jewels. Some tall, quick tales, lies about my young hunter of a husband, always away with his bow and arrows in the hills, forever in the forests during daylight. When they came again, I was excited to share the happy news, unable to believe my husband's warnings, and they welcomed my tidings and were full of praise. The two of them gushed their excitement to dote on their niece or nephew, wondering if the child would take after me, its mother. Perhaps blessed with beauty, they blinded me with the words I'd hoped for, naming my best qualities. I listened eagerly. I was a fool, and they were lowering my defenses. They cooed of the features the sweet thing might have, what features of my husband might pass on to the child. I tried to distract them with colours for their nursery. They went on about the popular new styles in their own kingdoms, both trying to outdo the other. As they argued, I wondered about an answer to their question. How could I know? Would I see parts of my unknown husband's face inside my child's? Would he allow it? What would become of us, our lives? Would he really come only at night and leave by dawn? Would our child ever know their father in light? Or would we continue to live this half-life, shrouded in darkness? My sister's laughter brought my attention back from my idle thoughts. They had begun their usual bragging of their own kingdoms and husbands. They spoke of their wealth and standing, the good fortunes of their people. Then they turned to me. They asked if my fortunes were well. They asked how long my fortunes would remain. But in my absence, they had long thought of the prophecy from the oracle. Imagining the foul beast described, they expressed their relief at hearing of my handsome young husband. For I had described no serpent with wings, and they now knew, with their own eyes, that I was safe. At least from him, for he was just a man. Then they went back to their favourite topic, themselves. I can see it all more plainly now. But then I was so pleased at their kindness, the comfort of family. They chattered on, but I was caught in the fear of the unknown. I knew we had spoken long, but I feared. Did I know my husband enough? What of our child? What if the prophecy was right? Perhaps this is how he kills me. If he were some monstrous beast to look upon. And what if some monster was growing inside me too? But of all the nights I knew him, he had been kind. What is the reason for that? But my sisters gasped and explained, knocking me back. What of the beast around the mountain? Had I seen the creature as they had? Confused and stricken by the statement, I could not understand, but stuttered out. What beast? What creature? Where? They said after the winds had placed them on the cliff edge, they saw it. A foul, devilish thing, leather wings, claws, and scales. A snake tail slithered behind it as it scrambled down the mountain into the valley. Its red eyes missed their escape, and they ran as fast as they could. My sisters comforted me as I felt the blood drain from my face. My head spun, and I burst out a confession to them as they sat beside me, holding out tissues, including me, caring for me. I said, I do not know my husband's true name, for we only met at night. They leapt back and gasped again before erupting into high screeches, scorning me. How could you lie to us, Psyche? How could you be pregnant by a man you do not even know? How do you know he is not a grotesque thing? A shriveled old man? An ugly, greasy teen? Or even the monstrous creature with wings and a tail? The monster wants you to be here so you don't escape. He means to fatten you up and let his monster spawn eat you from the inside out. It may rip you in half before you give birth. I cried that they stopped, and with snivels and tears on my face, I tried to explain he had been kind to me. They had said that it is all part of his plot. You must fight back. Protect yourself, Psyche. Hide an oil lamp and a weapon. You cannot face a beast alone. When he sleeps, light the lamp and see the monster plain before you. Strike him while he sleeps. Kill the creature before he kills you. Do you not remember the oracle's words? Your fate told plain. You have forgotten, and he will be your end. Change your fate, Psyche, and maybe you can save your child. It is his fate to be your doom. Do not let him fool you. Save your child. You must be brave. As they knew I could be. Oh, those vicious words. They stroked my hair and kissed my cheeks. They had created a storm in my mind. I was running through everything and trying to see fault in him. And he had told me not to believe my sisters. What if he knew they had seen him? What if this was part of his plot? To turn me against my family and never run while his monster grows. I had let myself forget the prophecy. That rang true. And that was my fuel. I could no longer sit in the dark. The life of my child, what fate had they? If he was the love I have known, if it was true that he was ugly or old, I could live with that. I adored the man I had come to know in darkness. I did not care what he was in the light, but I could not bear a monster. I wanted to believe my sisters could never do me harm, but I was wrong. When the moment came, though, I had to know. I lit the lamp and held it up to my sleeping husband's silhouette. First I saw his wings, white and soft, feathers that glowed with the oil lamp's light. I had never felt them, never known or thought he could even have them. My stomach dropped as I looked further. His wings were beautiful, but they were still wings. What more monstrous parts could I find? Fear shot through me and I clutched the dagger tightly. But then I saw skin, no scales, just normal tanned skin. A human body. And a divine face. The most beautiful man I had ever seen. He had soft lips and a peaceful smile rested on them. I took a step forward and pain shot in the base of my soul. My head span, the room began to fade away. A warm haze fell over my vision, and I looked down to see an arrowhead. Inside, pricking at the sole of my foot. It had fallen loose from the quiver on the floor. Next to it lay a golden bow, and I knew he was a god. This was Eros, the son of Aphrodite and god of love. I looked upon Eros, my husband. The light seemed to emanate from him now. My stomach burst with butterflies, my head rushed, and the love in my heart only grew. It burst through every fibre of my being, and the relief I felt. The sheer joy to know the man I loved in darkness was a man. His beauty was not the true prize, but the safety of my child was. The safety of all of my memories, no longer tainted with fear and doubt. I had loved him in darkness, and the passion I felt now overflowed. I lunged towards Eros, trance-like, acting on instinct alone. But I still held the oil lamp in my hand, and it spilt. Burning hot oil was thrown across the bed, splashing over Eros. His shoulder and wing were covered, and I froze. His eyes snapped open. You are aware of how this ended. How he reacted to my betrayal, my weakness and fear. I tried to drop the dagger, but he took it before I could. My begging did not convince him. My screams and tears did not move him. He left me alone in the wilderness, atop that tree. From there, I sunk into despair. He was right. I was a fool and had ruined it all. But did he ever truly consider the future? The future of our child? I kept asking, why hide such a beautiful face? I was only confused then. Upset and angry, frustrated and hopeless. I wept for all I had lost. Pregnant and alone, I climbed down the tree and cried as I walked, until I could no longer walk. I sat and cried myself to sleep. I woke with the dawn light, numb but restless, and walked on. I came across a stream and just sat. Strangely, a satyr playing a jaunty tune led a nymph to the bank opposite. She danced and he played his flute, and I turned away. But I walked into the water. First, waves hit my toes, icy cold, but I did not react. Further and further until I was waist deep in the river waters, intent on letting them take me. But the satyr called my name. I asked not how he knew it. He had stopped his playing and had come to the edge. He talked me back onto the bank, after some time I am ashamed to admit. But I collapsed on the ground beside him and cried again. He took the time to comfort me, and with a warm voice like oak wood, he brought back my faith and pushed me to live on, to seek Eros, to show him my regret and despair, to pray to him, for he may come. Something in this satyr, his steadiness, his light laughter, his eyes like a goat, brought me warmth. He bid me farewell and played a pan flute for his companion. They danced off together into the forest. Alone but determined, I set my path and walked. On, and I searched for an altar, places of sacrifice and prayer. I hoped to come across a temple, but when I saw a shrine, I thought it would do well. Out in the wilderness, a small dedication to the goddess Demeter. There was a statue to her with offerings from the harvest, wheat and barley, seeds and nuts, fruits and vegetables with flamed candles. But dust and dirt was smothering the surfaces. I took a moment and cleaned the place up. I wiped the grime away from the stones and kneeled to pray when all was right. But I heard nothing, no sign at all. No flickering candles or wings in the leaves, no animals that could be heard disguised. Just quiet. I thought perhaps she was afraid of Aphrodite, for Eros must have run to her by now. I rested at that altar to Demeter until the next morning, praying to Eros with no result. The next day's journey, I walked through more lands with naught but the animals and vegetation for company, until the horizon had smoke wafting, and a city I knew appeared before me. I had heard many tales of this place, but only seen it once before. I had attended the wedding of my sister, for this was her husband's city. Anger, betrayal, and obsession overtook my mind. They had caused this. My sisters had put the very thoughts in my head that cost me everything. My lover had been right, but I wanted to believe otherwise. I devised a test for my sister, the middle child of our family. I went to her home in tears, begged to see her, and immediately spluttered out the tragic order of events. How she gasped at the real revelation. No beast but the god of love and lust, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. How her eyes widened. I told her the story up until my husband opened his eyes. No word a lie, but then I wove in the fabrication easily beside the truths, telling my sister in a heartbroken tone that Eros, the god of love, had cast me out and decreed we were no longer wedded, that he would take one of my sisters to be his new bride. She must go to the cliffs, and Zephyrus will bring her safely to her new life. The palace and lands, all hers, as she would rule as the wife of Eros. I wanted her to comfort me, to call him a monster, offer me rest, a place with her to stay. But she ran. She did not bid me or her husband goodbye, but asked the servant for a horse to be readied. I left her house, dejected further. But I walked on, for it was not just my life anymore. For the sake of the father of my child to know how sorry I am. Then there may be a chance that my child would be spared, would not be cursed by the gods. I whispered these prayers to my love as I walked, begging forgiveness, misunderstanding intent, swearing to be true. I knew he probably wouldn't listen, but I had to try. I loved him. Before the arrow, and even more so afterwards. I cared about him so much, it was beyond words. It was my light, my love that kept me going on and on. I travelled far until I came across a temple, bigger than the small shrine from before. It was a temple to the great goddess Hera. I prayed again, but all my prayers were whispered to the winds. Blown away, unanswered, silent. I walked through the night and came across a second city. Luck would find it was home to my other sister, the eldest of us all. I hoped she would not fail me too, so I tried my luck. I told her the same story of the beast being the great god Eros, and the trick to test her too. But she followed suit. The liar ran. Straight to the cliff's edge, no doubt, to claim her prize. I wondered if she'd see our sister's body as she fell to join her at the bottom. Zephyrus only followed Eros's orders. With him gone, he would not catch them. They would just fall. But with my eldest sister already tripping over her own skirts, I doubted she'd see her before it was too late. It felt good to know their true colours. In a way, I saw it as them sealing their fates themselves. To watch them fall for my lies when I had so easily fallen for theirs. I left her palace as she did, and I wandered her city streets, but but found them wanting. Tired faces, overworked and hungry. These cities seem worse than anything my sisters had said, and so different from our fathers. Though I did not leave our home to venture among the people much, I remembered the streets of home. Our people were happier than any here. None were as hopeless as the ones before me then. I could not take it. I dipped into a back alley to take a breath. From there, I heard crowds gathering, filling the streets with hustle and bustle. One noise resounded above the rest, a booming voice above the mortal chatter. It was a bounty for me. Hermes, the messenger god, had been called to spread the news. I saw him disappear into the clouds above. No doubt to the next city, to further spread the warrant for my head. Aphrodite hunted for me. Any who found me and spoke would be rewarded. I stole a cloak and pulled the hood high. But where would my Eros go? To his mother, of course. If she wished to reward those who found me, what would she do if I turned myself in? If there was any chance of seeing him, I had to go, but I would have to get her attention. Mortals cannot go to the domains of the gods. We cannot even perceive their true homes without permission. So I walked toward a temple of Aphrodite. There I knelt and prayed, sacrificed and waited. Smoke swirled around me, and everything became a haze. When I opened my eyes, I was kneeling before great pine doors. Delicately carved wood, beautiful flowers and birds among the decorated entrance. They wrenched open and a blinding light hit my eyes. An arm grabbed mine and I was brought inside. Light pink and orange light filled the place. It was draped with luxurious fabrics and heavy fragrances that filled the air, thick floral scents that assaulted the senses. I was pulled through throngs of nymphs, satyrs and naiads, along corridors, until the hand that hauled me dropped me on the cold of the stone floor. I yelped with pain, and cackles of laughter echoed around me. The hand belonged to habit, and it had let me go. Sorrow and melancholy appeared beside them. They pushed me down, hooked my limbs, and pulled. I fell onto the stone again and again as I tried to stand. And they taunted above me. Voices chattered and pain racked me. A clap resounded over us all, and there was silence. I raised my weak head as a figure cut through the crowds. They all parted for her. She was magnificent, too perfect to describe. No mortal could compare to her. Golden and glowing, but her expression. Her eyes were bright, but filled with hate. Disgust and anger pierced through me, and I shrunk back from her. I broke her fierce gaze and stared at the tiles on the floor, curling into a ball, covering myself, as if hiding could make me disappear. Her voice was like a chorus of bells, melodic but overwhelming. It left me pained with my ears still ringing. I did not understand her thunderous voice, but I felt the fists of her henchmen. Punch after punch until she clapped again. I was crying hard, still crumpled on the floor with my arms over my stomach. I tried to focus on her words, her bitterness and mocking as she said my name. So, this is the girl, the mortal my son fell for. The one showered in my adorations. This Psyche is no beauty. She is pathetic. I could not help but agree with her, but I stayed silent. Her lackeys circled me as she continued her taunts, degrading and picking apart my life. numerous foul words about my looks, my mortal status, my lack of love. I tried not to care, but then she laughed at my child. How they would be a bastard, for my marriage was a sham. Mortal and divine cannot be wedded. It was a travesty, like a fish and a bird together. Who was present at this ceremony? No witnesses, no family. It was no true marriage. The crowds around me called my child a bastard over and over. I tried not to let them see my tears, to ignore them, but the goddess of beauty and love would not be ignored. She wrenched me up from the floor and I met her enchanting eyes. Scared beyond my mind, unable to truly comprehend her, Aphrodite inspected my face, tear-stained and bruised. The fire in her eyes only grew, and she dropped me hard on the floor. She remarked to the crowds in her court, "Who could ever love me for my beauty, or lack thereof?" I must have earned their love in other ways, especially after scorning her own son. Aphrodite fell silent. In the quiet, I asked if I could see him, beg forgiveness, repent my actions, as all I wished was to face my punishments, to earn an audience with my husband. I hoped my flattery of her, pleading and grovelling, would be enough to satisfy her. But her bell-like laughter began once more, and the crowds joined her. I lowered my head and waited. She held her hands out in front of her. From her open palms, seeds emerged and fell to the floor. Cascades of wheat, barley, millet, and poppy seed. They flowed from her hands like water, and more filled the room. I saw chickpeas and lentils and beans spreading further and further across the floors among the legs of the guests. Aphrodite's hands closed, and the seeds stopped. The heap covered most of the mosaic in the hall. She raised her head, and the room seemed to all lean into her, waiting to hear her words. She declared a series of trials to test me. The bold mortal who seeks favour of gods. I must prove my worth, and these seeds will be the first of my challenges. If I passed the goddess's trials, I could plead my case with Eros. I would have a chance to speak with him. I latched onto this and was filled with hope. On the morrow, at the first light of dawn, I would begin organising the mixed piles. The test was to sort the jumbles and to separate them into piles of their own kind. Before Aphrodite returned at dusk, if I should fail, I was to leave Eros to heal from the damage I had caused. I was to go back to the mortal realm and fade into obscurity. But after this grand announcement, Aphrodite ordered me sent to a room across her villa, out of sight. Melancholy marched me to the room by the cellar and locked me in. Outside, the divine continued to feast and celebrate. I was trapped in that cold, small room, and all I thought of was Eros. I tried to pray, to reach out to him, but there was no response. Yet I prayed most of the night. I tried the door, but no matter how hard I pushed, it remained stuck. So I sat on the stone and continued my prayers until I fell into sleep. The next day I was woken by a thumping sound. I heard the clicking of the lock and the door swung open. Aphrodite in an exquisite gown stood in the doorway. She tipped her head up and looked down her nose at me. I broke her gaze, too intense for my eyes, and focused on her robes instead. Light pink shimmering fabric that it moved like water and caught the light just the same. Without a word, she turned and walked down the corridor. I scrambled to my feet to follow. She seemed to float with such grace as I plodded beside her. We walked until we were back in the hall with the heaps of seeds. She repeated her instructions, though quieter. Without her audience to sweeten her tone, she spoke through gritted teeth. She left hastily, slamming the wooden doors behind her. I knelt and got to work. I gathered baskets and sifted through the piles. Mind-numbing, fiddly work. I sorted as the skies lightened, and when I looked back up from my focus, it was noon. I had worked for hours, only sorted a few meters of floor before me. This was when the panic and dread set in. I realized the trick. For this task she had set for me, it was not possible. Not for I alone to sort the whole hall before dusk. If I had been given a week, perhaps 2, I alone could manage it. But with the speed at which I was going, it would not be done in time, and I would fail. I tried to sort faster, but my fear made my hands falter. I fumbled and dropped. My eyes became blurred. I looked into the corridors of the hall, but each was empty. All the locks fastened. It had been so full yesterday, yet now it was desolate. It felt like I was the only soul in the house at all. My delusion came crashing down then. Sorting the seeds seemed to be a simple task. I even thought it was kind. But the kindness was revealed to be a lie, another betrayal. With the betrayal of my sisters, the loss of my husband, the pain in my body, and the weariness of it all. All my dreams were scattered and shattered. All of it, my unending, exhausting love for Eros. Each hope transformed to despair, and I broke down into cries. I wanted to be strong, to never give up, but I was only human. Against forces beyond my power, the very will of gods. There was naught to do but cry. My tears made their own puddle among the seeds. With all the tears, I could barely see the thousands of seeds. I heaved and wept, swallowed with it all. But I was not truly alone. As I lay on the stone floor, small creatures began to move out of sight. At first, I did not notice them, too wrapped up in myself. Then, I thought the seeds were moving by themselves. Different ones all began to move, marching along the floor to the various corners of the room. As I looked closer, it was not the seeds, but a horde of ants. They emerged from the cracks in the stone mosaics and up from the floors. I dried my tears and sat up, watching them. More and more came, each picking up a single seed and walking to the different heaps in the room. I could not believe my eyes. In a mere hour, the work was done. Everything had been sorted, ordered, and made perfect. The ants did not communicate to me, nor make a sign. I half expected them to speak in small voices to me. But they finished their work, and they did not linger. They departed quietly into the holes from whence they came. I swept the hall from the centre to the edges, where the piles lay. Wheat, barley, millet, poppy seed, chickpeas, lentils, and beans, all in neat heaps. My hope was restored. With new vigour I looked to the horizon. Where I had wished the day to slow, now I longed for dusk to come sooner. I willed the sun to set, and wanted to see her figure walking toward the door. I thought of Eros. He would be here, somewhere in these halls. With the spare time, I tried each door again. None had yielded to my touch, none had opened, and none of my prayers were answered. I ran my hands through the soft fabrics on the walls, and they reset themselves, the drapery righting itself like a soldier coming to attention. Not a crease out of place, or different than before. It was the softest material I had ever touched, and I was a princess before all of this. I remembered how soft my husband's skin felt, even the calluses on Eros's hands from his bow and arrows. The door across the hall slammed open, the wood carvings splintered and ricocheted off the stone walls. Aphrodite was home, and with a smirk on her face. But it dropped, her graceful features scrunched up. First shock and confusion, and then it changed to disgust. She marched into the center of the hall with her lackeys at her sides. Her eyes darted from each pile to the next until they fell upon me. Her gaze pierced through me, and I saw that burning anger in her eyes. My body told me to cower, to submit to her, or to run. So I knelt, and I bowed my head, showing the goddess her due respect. I hoped it would alter her confusing wrath and hide my own terror. She congratulated me through gritted teeth, her mask back up, and threw a crust of bread on the floor. I heard her footsteps depart, and the door slammed shut again. The lackeys, sorrow and melancholy, cackled as they dragged me back to the storeroom from before. I worried she would send me on endless tasks, keeping me from Eros. I slept poorly, anxious about the morning. Aphrodite's scream woke me, her calling my name, and the dread sat heavy in my stomach. Sweat beaded on my palms, and I pushed myself off of the tile. Melancholy met me at the door and brought me to the gardens of Aphrodite's home. There she waited. The view overlooked the valleys below, with a river and an idyllic green landscape. Birds flew in the skies overhead, but Aphrodite pointed her finger to the green fields, drawing my attention to a flock that grazed there. Sheep, simple in all but their fleece, for it shone in the sunlight like molten gold. I was in awe of the golden fleece when I felt a hand come to rest on my shoulder. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I dared to look up at the goddess. I wondered how I did not notice the divinity of Eros when he came from such raw power. A sly smile was plastered on her face, but back then I thought it was genuine. Aphrodite went on to sweetly explain the second task, lulling me into thinking it was simple. Just as before, the instructions were clear: to fetch some fleece from the golden sheep and bring it back before nightfall. But as the task before, I knew there would be some impossible catch. Yet I smiled back at her, shyly. I took the basket she thrust into my hands and walked down to the valleys below. There in the fields, I watched the flocks from afar, trying to understand the catch of the task. I stayed near the bank of the river and waited in the tree shade. From my spot, I watched a lone wolf descend. There were no fences, no gates to protect the flock. There did not even seem to be a shepherd. And so, the wolf picked its prey. It circled around a small one, wandering the edges. But when it tried to strike, the sheep turned and charged. Horns grew from its head in an instant. It slammed into and pierced the wolf. Blood poured out, and the wolf howled with pain. As the sheep pulled back, the wolf's skin and entrails clung to its horns. And they were pulled out, spilt over the grass, staining it all. The wolf stopped howling quickly after that, and the sheep's horns sunk back as if they had never grown at all. It went back to grazing, moving away from the gored corpse of the wolf to find fresh grass. It clicked into place. She had meant for me to die. to be killed like the wolf. I went to the river, shaken by what I had seen. I washed my face in the cold waters and tried to think of a way to get that fleece. But as I thought, nothing was coming to mind. Just images of the wolf, my imagination replacing its fur with my own belly, my guts strewn about the grass. I felt sick. I sat for a long time, well into the afternoon, and the light began to fade. All the plans and ideas I had thought of, none of them would work. Climbing a tree to come at them from above? None of the sheep were grazing anywhere near the tree line, waiting for them to come to the river for a drink. No, even then they could still turn and charge at me easily. I could not help it. I became so frustrated, tears welled up in my eyes. I sat by the river and added to its waters, losing ideas with the daylight. I grew angry and struck the water, splashing them about, until I heard whispers. A strange voice coming from no source. It seemed impossible. But as I looked and listened, it was coming from a reed growing in the river. Quiet words soothed me and calmed me. The voice told me to look further, beyond the hill, where the sheep had been left to wander. They explored the whole area. Hidden away were the bramble bushes with berries they particularly enjoyed. I dried my tears and listened to all from the reed, and went to the hidden brambles that the voice spoke of. There were barely any berries left, but in thorns among the branches were heaps of golden fleece, for as they ate the berries, it would easily get caught and hang on the sharp spikes. I took the clumps of wool and filled the basket with ease. The sunset was beautiful and lit my path back to Aphrodite's, but as I arrived at the doors, I hesitated, reminded of her anger. I knew she would not be pleased at this outcome. I steeled myself as best I could, took a deep breath, and knocked. Melancholy answered, her thin eyes narrowed further as she looked at me and the basket. She swung the door open and I saw the feast they were having. Platter after platter, cups of deep red wine everywhere. Music and laughter. I weaved through the crowds, clutching the basket close, until I stood before Aphrodite once more. She raised her hand and everyone grew silent. I knelt and placed the basket at her feet, and she put on a tight smile. I saw her sigh. I felt her let out a huff, and she sent me away again. But before any of her minions could usher me out, I spoke. I stated before all, I had completed 2 tasks. How many more might the goddess supply before I am proven worthy? A darkness appeared in her eyes, and she snapped forward before her eyes fell to the crowd. She then slowly eased back, lounging on her throne. For 2 completed, you shall have 2 more. That is all, Psyche. Get out of my sight. 2 more challenges, and I had already completed 2 impossible tasks. I slept a little better that night, but still, my whispered prayers to Eros continued until I fell asleep. The next morning, I was kept in that room until noon. I heard the voices of Aphrodite and her followers, though I could not make a word out. She sounded angry. I was pressed against the door when it jerked open. I almost fell onto the floor, but caught myself just in time. Misery dragged me back to the hall, not even letting me get up on my feet. I was placed before Aphrodite again. This time, she marched to a balcony, and I was pushed behind her. She raised her hand, and a clear crystal chalice appeared as she twisted her wrist. She placed it in my hands, and then pointed toward a lofty mountain. I saw a dark stream pouring from the top. It flowed down the mountain to a cliff face. There it continued and fell into a chasm, an abyssal hole in the ground, which did not seem to have an end. The goddess declared she wanted me to fill the vessel with its waters, yet only water from its beginning would do, and to be back before the next dawn. She did not name the river, but I knew it by its colour, by the way her lackeys looked at one another, hiding their smirks, and from the drop into the darkness. This was no ordinary stream. It was the birth, it was the beginning of the river that flowed into the underworld. That was the river Styx. But I did not let them know I knew. I smiled and walked my aching body toward the mountain. As I did, I went over the tales, the stories of my youth, over and over. Any mentions of this river were vital, and I recalled the guards of its source. Snakes that never blinked, keeping a constant vigil. Dragons with stretching necks and snapping jaws. I climbed as high as I could. The closer I got, the more I heard words. Not from any creature around me, but from the rocks splashing in the dark waters. Strange questions and warnings, short and curt at first, telling me to go, leave, run whilst I could. But then as I got closer, they uttered longer warnings. Who are you? What's your game? You will never make it. Turn back or face the beasts. How are you to reach your goal? There is nowhere else to walk. The voices were right as the path in the mountain came to a cliffside. A drop into the darkness. I saw the reflecting eyes down there, hissing and snapping. I could not jump across, nor could I climb any higher, and I was not close enough to the source of the spring. I had no options, no choices left. It was either climb down and accept defeat, or jump and die to the beasts or the drop. There was no solution, no way to succeed at this task. I looked down at the chalice and thought of filling it with my tears. 'Twas the best hope I had. But she would know the difference. As I turned to throw it into the chasm, I raised my arm and squawk sounded above. It scared me and made me jump. I dropped the crystal cup and it fell off the edge. Then I felt a burst of air hit my face and saw the feathers of a bird shoot past. It was diving quickly through the air, following the glinting crystal. It flew with precision and snatched up the cup in its claws before turning in the skies. It flew back to me, and there I could tell it was a huge eagle. Its feathers were rich of colour with gold glinting tips. The wingspan was beyond any bird I had ever seen, and it landed in front of me. It stood to nearly half my height. As we locked eyes, I heard it speak into my mind. It told me not to be afraid. It had come to aid me at the request of its master, Styx. Styx was a powerful river that the gods themselves swore oaths upon. No mortal could touch it without consequence. But the eagle was willing to fly past the snakes and dragon teeth to the tip of the mountain, far beyond where I might tread, and fetch its dark waters for me. Before I could thank it, it launched from the cliff edge. A gust of wind hit me again, and all I could do was wait, for it flew high into the clouds above my purview. The sun had set, and the night was getting colder. I heard hisses and roars from above and below. With a flap of wings, the eagle burst through the clouds again. It landed as it did before, though more carefully, and presented the chalice of crystal, held aloft by its beak, filled to the brim of a dark flowing liquid. I beamed and thanked the bird before taking it from him. I thanked it again and again and asked of its journey, of the noises I had heard, and the bird's strange voice inside my head told me of the arguments it had had with the snakes and dragons. He tried to fly through, but they had snapped and blocked his path, until he lied and said it was Aphrodite who commanded him. They dipped out of his way then and let him fill the chalice with ease. I felt smug and pleased as I made the journey back to her home. Surely she would throw a fit when she saw me still breathing. Only one step away from my love, and I still had the whole night to get back. It was hours before dawn, with the stars still high in the skies, when I returned to Aphrodite's home, and her court were in their drunken stupor. Silver mirrors had been placed on several walls, all of which wore extravagant fabrics. The whole court were holding full cups, with numerous empty vessels strewn about the floor. Many of them were admiring their own reflections, including the goddess of beauty herself, sighing and gazing at herself as she combed through her hair, giggling with her flock, until she saw my shadow over her shoulder, and her eyes went back to the familiar rage I had come to know. Her jaw had clenched and her expression darkened. It became more solemn. The music stopped then, and all hushed as they turned to look at me. I carried the chalice carefully, my head held high. I stopped before her throne and placed it at her feet. I dropped to my knees and lowered my head in respect. I said nothing. She sighed, no longer bothering with her mask, and told me to leave. My final task would come tomorrow. As I turned to leave, I felt the rush of something past my ear, the sound of shattering glass and splashing of water as it hit the stone. She had thrown the chalice at the wall. The surface smoked and sizzled where the waters touched it, but I did not flinch. I kept walking, closed the doors behind me, and went to rest, pleased I had survived another day, bold enough to explore the corridors and try the locks on each again. I had been down several with no luck, when I turned a corner and saw two I recognized. Melancholy and sorrow stood like guards at an ornate door. I knew it had to be his room. Eros, my husband, lay behind that door. But I did not wish for another beating. I retreated to my cupboard. After climbing a mountain, my legs and arms hurt. I would need rest if I was to complete the final task, whatever it may be. I slept peacefully that night. Hope once again warmed my heart. The next morning, I woke at dawn, waiting for the door to be opened, eager to get the final task done. But Aphrodite made me wait, again. This time she came to fetch me herself, alone. A tight smile on her face, she congratulated me on my successes so far. But clearly, she was frustrated I had done so well. The serpentine narrowing of her eyes, paired with that smile, made me uneasy. She would not give me a simple task. This would be the worst. She took me to her hall and showed me an empty box. Made of pure gold, the case was engraved with doves, sparrows, and swans. It had the remnants of a glimmering pearlescent cream, her personal beauty cream. She complained that it had all been used to massage and soothe Eros. His skin was still healing from burns I had caused. I found out later, she had lied. Eros was healed already and kept under lock and key, healing emotional wounds, not physical ones. Even then I thought, how could hot oil hurt a god? His wounds should not remain long enough to still ail him. But I believed her. It was a clever dagger to hurt me further. She said, having used all of her supply to heal her son, she had none left for herself, wallowing on how wilted she felt, whilst she appeared to me as fresh as morning dew. No less beautiful than the day before, Aphrodite told me my final task then. It was to take the small box to Persephone, the goddess of spring and queen of the underworld, and bring back some of her beauty cream to make up for the loss. That was all. Go to the underworld and back. I asked her, how might I, a mortal, make it to the underworld? And she laughed in my face. Use your wits. She spat. This task is yours, and yours alone. I will not help you solve it. That is up to you. I took the box and marched from her home. At first, toward the chasm, the hole that dropped into darkness where Styx's source flowed. But before I could climb the mountain, I spotted a tower, tall and right by the edge of the drop. It was the only way I could think of. I may drop and drown or be dashed across the rocks, but that is one way to enter the underworld. I knew no others. The ivory tower had hundreds of steps, but at least it was lower than the mountain cliff. I could not give up, and I had no other plans, so I climbed to the very top. After hours with sweat covering my body, I made it to the peak. I stepped to the edge of the balcony on the top floor and heard the words of the river again, telling me to leave, run, and go. But then, another voice called out, different from the river.
Stop, Psyche! You must not jump.
As I turned, I could see no person or animal that could have been the source. It came from the inside of the tower, as if the walls were speaking themselves. I walked toward the wall, away from the edge. Something seemed warm and familiar about the voice, like the reed from before. I put it out of my mind and I listened as the tower continued.
You cannot enter the underworld from this point. If you fall from this height, you will perish, and you will not be able to return to the land of the living. It is another trick, Psyche. Listen to me and follow my instructions precisely, and you will succeed at this task. There is an opening, like many hidden doors to the underworld on Earth, not too far from here. You can enter from there, for there is a cave by a waterfall. Find the stone that is the darkest, the wall furthest from the light. You must walk straight through the hard stone. It is a portal. From a jagged rock, you will arrive on the shores of Hades. But the land of the dead is a treacherous place, and Aphrodite does not like to lose. You must prepare for your journey. 2 golden coins are needed, 1 for your fare across the river Styx, and 1 for your way back. Make sure Charon takes the coins from you himself. Next, you will need wine-soaked and honey-baked barley cakes. They are the favorite treats of Cerberus, and he will let you pass only for this price. 2 are needed, 1 for the journey there, and 1 for the journey back. There will be tricks planted to steal the coins and the cakes. Whether you put them down or they will beg you for them, you must not stop. You must not delay. Do not speak to anyone. It is all a ruse. Spirits in the river will beg to be let on board Charon's boat. Souls that wander on the other side will ask for your help. You must walk, ignore them all, until you reach Hades' palace. There are more traps here that you must avoid. Persephone will offer a lavish feast, a comfortable place to sit, and the softest bed to rest. But do not give in to these temptations. If you eat the food of the underworld, you will be trapped there for eternity. Sit upon the floor and drink naught but water and a crust of old bread. You must drink and sit. Compliment her flowers. She is proud of them, and this will win you favor. Then you must state your task and ask for her beauty cream. Once you have it, you must make your way back through the path you entered. The most important part you must not forget is do not open the box. Bring it straight back, and you shall succeed and see your love again.
I took in every word, trusting the voice from the tower. I went across the land, exactly to where the tower directed, and found the cave. Aphrodite had given no time limit, so I stopped to prepare for the journey. I camped out in that cave, visited a village for the ingredients and coins I would need. Within a day, I was rested more and healed a little. With the coins secured and the cakes baked, I decided I was ready. I stepped toward the darkest cave wall and walked straight through it. It felt like falling. I cannot quite recall what I saw. I remember colours and shapes. Things blurred together until all became one, and then darkness. I landed on black sands and looked out onto the horizon. The underworld was not quite as I imagined. It was much bigger than I had thought. Shades and souls lined the shore waiting. Styx looked even darker than in the mortal world, a black inkiness that swallowed the light. I understood what people meant by Stygian waters then. Across the river, I saw it. The lands of Hades, and my next destination. I clutched the cakes and coins tighter in my fists and walked the shoreline. The suffering souls frightened me with their cries, so I tried to keep my distance. But then I saw a crowd of them all gathered together. As I looked, the souls around me walked the same way, toward the crowd. So I followed them, hoping to find the ferrymen. As a mere mortal among spirits, I could walk straight through them. However, it left a sick feeling in my stomach, a fog in my head and an ache in my bones. I tried to walk around them, but the gathering was too thick. I took a deep breath and ran through them, holding my sickness in my stomach and looking for the boat. As I burst to the other side, I saw it as it reached the beach. Charon at its helm. He kept his hood up and his face was obscured. Looking at him sent a shiver down my spine. His robes were wet at the edges with sand, and his hands were thin and ragged. But I took out my first obolus and placed it in my mouth. He took the fare himself and waved me onto his ship. I waited as he took the coins from each soul and shade. Those without began to beg and scratch at his boat, but some force stopped them from climbing aboard. When the boat was filled, he picked up his long staff. It transformed into an oar, and he began to steer the boat. We sailed out onto the river, and I watched the waters. Thicker than the waters of earth, darker than the liquid in the crystal chalice the eagle had handed me. It moved unlike any river I knew. We passed large stones and grew closer to the lands on the other side. Under the waves, pale skull shapes began to appear just below the surface. They bobbed up and down, they sank into the waters, and one head stuck out above the rest. An old man with a long face, hollow and gaunt. Translucent, but his eyes glowed a pure white as he opened them. I found myself leaning closer to look. His eyes met mine and a hand shot out of the water. I jumped back as his fingers scratched at the edge of the boat, then his whole head emerged. He begged and scraped at the boat's edge, his voice hoarse and strained. There was a deep wound across his throat. The flaps of flesh parted, and I could see the cords and strings of his muscles underneath. I shut my eyes and tried not to vomit. I covered my ears to his cries and ignored his splashing hand. With my fists clenched, it did not help. Even though instinct told me to help him, to grab his hand and pull him aboard, I could not. I remembered Eros, and the shade frightened me so. Instead, I looked towards the next shore and waited, but I still saw him in the corner of my sight. It took time for him to sink back down into the river, and more time still before we reached the other shore. When we landed, I let the other souls depart first. I did not want to walk through them again if I could help it. I followed the souls all headed towards the gates, where I saw the Hound of Hell for the very first time. Kerberos stood tall above us all. His 3 heads each looked in different directions, constantly vigilant. His teeth were bared with each head, and one began growling. For 2 souls tried to push through the gates. They screamed of false judgment and their wishes to escape, to be free of Hades. But Cerberus barked and growled with 2 heads as his jaws snapped down. He flicked his heads together, and the spirits were sent flying through the grey skies, landing back behind the gates. I felt nervous as I tried to blend in with the souls around me, but my body was not translucent. My soul still attached to my living flesh, and I was sniffed out instantly. I froze as the eyes of the guard landed on me. Cerberus's heads dropped low. One faced me straight on, the other 2 surrounded both my sides. His sniffing noses blew hot air over every inch of me. But he did not growl. He did not bark. He did not unhinge his jaws and swallow me whole. His mouths dropped open, and drool pooled at the edges. I had frozen at the size of the beast. After all the tales I had heard, I still had not expected him to be so big. But Cerberus's eyes softened, and he waited. His noses sniffed more curiously now, and they had caught a scent that enticed. I then took 1 honeyed barley cake from my hand and split it in 3. I threw the pieces at each head and ran toward the gate as they chewed. When I looked back, his tail wagged happily. His attention was on the souls behind me. I slowed my pace to catch my breath and walked on. Through the shining gates of adamant, past the halls of judgment with the 3 kings of legend, past the dungeon doors and into the lands. Through the fields of flowers and the souls that wandered there, I clutched the cake and obelisk throughout it all. My lifeline to the mortal realm. I came across a man, a soul carrying bundles of sticks. He begged me to pick up a few he had dropped, to help them and place them on the pile in his full arms. But I did not stop. I just walked past. When the crowds of souls thinned, I saw a palace on the horizon. As I drew closer, walking long hours in the grey world, I came across a group of women. They were all sat by looms and were weaving tapestries. They invited me to sit, to weave with them. One weaver turned, with strings and wool in her hands, all tangled in a mess. Confusion and sadness in her eyes, and it reminded me of my own grandmother, how she had lost all her skills in old age, and how she had begun to forget. I remembered that I would sit as a child by her side and help her untangle the yarn. We would do it together and watch Mother weave. The spirit's face seemed to resemble hers in the low light. I stopped for a moment, lost in my memories. She tried to reach my hands, to put the wool in them, perhaps to take the coin and cake out. But I backed away and held my clenched hands close to my chest. Squeezing the coin so tightly, I felt it bite at my palm. My own nails scratched and sunk into my skin to make moon-shaped wounds, but I did not let go. I walked away as the women began to scream after me, begging me to come back, then cursing me, insulting me and scaring me with their words and their ferocity. It pushed me further, and I hurried to the palace. Whatever I had imagined for the dwelling of the god of the dead, it was not this. His domain was bright, with gold and jewels embedded in the walls. Plants and flowers were on every table. It was open and warm, inviting even, grand and regal, a little intimidating. I was stopped by a shadowy figure. My eyes saw nothing but smoke in the shape of a man. Without a word, he stopped before me and then raised his arm to point down the hall. He floated toward it then, and I followed as I assumed he had meant for me to do. Through halls and corridors, pillars and plants, we walked until we came to a stop before large double doors. The smoke man raised his arms and pushed the wooden doors open, revealing the throne room of Hades himself. The smoke figure evaporated before my eyes, and I was left to walk in, alone. Their hall, it was even prettier than the rest of the palace, where Aphrodite's felt crowded, claustrophobic, beautiful but cold. This place was different. Elegant flourishes, brightly coloured flowers everywhere, with a strong stone covering it all. It spoke of power, old and strong, but not cold. This place felt honest. I walked towards the thrones and looked up at the gods sat there. Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld. They had a crowd around them, and I approached quietly. Hades talked to those around him. They presented papers and looked deep in discussion. I could not hear about what. Persephone was listening, chiming in occasionally, but less distracted. Someone was by her side and whispered into her ear, and I realized it was the same smoke shape that guided me here. The queen turned to look at me. I dropped to my knees and bowed my head, thanking her for welcoming me into her home. She got up from her place, and Hades stopped his conversations to grab her hand. He kissed it, and she walked down from their high pedestal towards me. She told me to follow. I would not deny a goddess. So we walked through the halls together. Persephone brought me to a room with a long table with many chairs. There she took the head of the table's seat and invited me to sit beside her. Platters of food, fruits and vegetables lined the table. Cups of wine, red and white, with different fruits for origin in rows behind. A whole roast pig, steaks and breads, soups and broths and stews. It all smelled intoxicating and made my mouth water. So many foods I had never even seen. My journey had been long, and I was near starved. I would have cried to eat just one grape. But I looked down. I shut my eyes, took a deep breath, and it did not help. I just smelled all the food again. But I focused on the voice of the tower. I remembered the words and politely declined. I sat on the floor beside the table. I asked for plain water. I did not even request the bread, too afraid it would trap me here. I sat with Persephone while she ate. She ate delicately, and I watched every mouthful, trying to imagine the tastes and flavors of each bite she took. She kept offering the perfectly cooked foods, and the ache in my stomach grew. But still, I resisted. It felt like an eternity as she ate her fill, and asked what I, a mortal girl, was doing in the land of the dead. I told her plainly that I came for love, and I needed her help. She leant forward and asked of my life, my tale, who I was, and who was this love I had fought so hard for to come to their realm. And I confessed it all. I told her of my life, the people of my city, the prophecy, my family, my marriage, and all that followed, my husband of shadows and the time it took for me to love him, the shocking reveal of his beauty. I still did not know why he chose to hide himself from me. He was everything I could have wished for and more. Then I told her of my losses, the betrayals of my family, the hard task and journey, my journey to that very palace. She seemed to enjoy my tale and sympathized. Her face was far more open and expressive than Aphrodite's. She felt warmer too. I felt I could talk to her. And I felt a fondness, a connection between us when my tale was done. It was then I asked her for her favor, to help me complete my last task, to please Aphrodite and win back my love. I placed the small golden case on the table beside her, and she smiled. A swift nod and she went to fetch the cream that Aphrodite desired. I was left alone in that wide room, and I let myself breathe. It was yet to be over, but I was so close now. I began to plot the journey I had taken in reverse, already walking back in my mind. Persephone glided back into the room and handed me the case, with a tight smile. I did not stay to see how it dropped, as I bowed and left their palace. Back in the lands of the underworld, I felt more confident then. The coin and cake still in one hand, the case of cream in the other. I hummed and whistled as I walked. I avoided looking at the spirits and shades. Somehow looking at them made me shiver. It made my insides cold and sad if I looked at them too long. I walked around where the weavers had been, staying out of earshot. I did not want to face them again. But I knew I could not stray too far from my previous path. It was better to face the dangers I did know, rather than face unknown horrors. And even though I knew what was to come, it did not make the journey back any less difficult. For there were even more challenges to face than on the way there. The man with the logs tried to beg me again too. Ignoring him was easy this time, but other spirits in the field came toward me. Men, women, children, young and old, they rushed me. They had not seemed to notice me at all on the way to the castle, but on the way back, it was as if I were a light that went up in a dark room, and they were moths flocking to it. The spirits and shadows could not truly touch me, but they walked straight through me, hitting my body and then fading into the mists. Each one screamed and changed me. As before, the sickness in my stomach and aches in my muscles returned, but this time the spirits also caused exhaustion to my spirit. Pain, nausea, weakness and screams, over and over, as the shades flew at and through me. Over and over, I apologized, I wept, but I kept walking. I told them I could not help. They would not listen. They did not stop. I wanted to clasp my hands over my ears and scream to block out their voices, but the cake, the coin, the golden case, they felt heavier and heavier in my hands. More kept coming, each sapping more of my energy, taking more of a toll. Yet, I stumbled on. Back through the fields, I avoided the spirits and hid in the tall grass and flowers. Past the halls, the rivers, the basement doors with screams of the tortured souls inside. Until I saw the gate. Cerberus came eagerly to my hand. A single head licked up the treat with its tongue. The other two gnashed their teeth, stretching and barking at the stolen prize. I did not stay to watch, for the souls at the gates all tried to clutch at me too. I ran through them, taking each hit, for Charon's boat was about to leave the shore. All the new spirits had flooded from his ship, yet I did not stop. I ran through them too. Sweat and grime on my skin, I put my arms over the edge of the boat. Sand stuck to half my body. I put the coin in my lips and heaved relief as he took it straight from them. After a moment, I hauled myself aboard his empty vessel. I landed on my back and lay there, spent, staring into the skies with my blood pumping into my ears and my heart still racing. I held the golden case to my chest, resting it there, and I allowed my body to go limp. I closed my eyes and felt the heavy shifting of the boat on the thick waters. Charon's gentle hand guiding us. Before, I was so afraid, but now, Charon's silence was a comfort. No fear, not overbearing nor awkward, just a peaceful presence. A body in the boat with me, like an old friend. With my eyes closed, I could pretend we were on a lake, sailing out to fish for hours to fill an empty afternoon. The cold case in my hand soothed me, but then the banging began. The boat shook as hands and fingers scratched at the underside of it again. Heads splashed and moans began, saying anything to be let aboard. I hugged myself tightly, trying to hold myself together for just a little longer. I took deep breaths and focused on my body, blotting out the outside world. Just in and out. I did not notice when the boat bumped against the shore. Charon used his oar to gently tap the side of the wood, and I sat up to see the beach. The jagged stone not too far, with the imprint in the sands where I landed. Though my feet were aching, it felt good to walk on solid ground again. The cold case still heavy in my hand, my short rest on the boat had only helped some. All those souls that passed through me before had drained me more than I had realized. I wiped the sweat off my brow and caught my reflection in the black mirror of Styx's waters. It frightened me. I had never looked so haggard. My hair was thin, greasy, and wild with the winds. Purple, bruise-like marks made my sunken eyes appear more bloodshot. I looked thinner, more skeletal and hollow. The toll taken on me was clear. The stress of everything. The first time I heard the prophecy, the marriage, the tasks, the loss, the hurt, the betrayal, the journey through the underworld, all of it had eaten me from the inside out. Pale and sickly. Would Eros even recognize me? I was not the same Psyche he knew, and I thought I could not continue like this. I would not let him see me in this broken state, not after he left me like that in the treetops. I wanted him to see me, changed but for the better. I was stronger now, bolder, willing to fight. These trials had tested me so, and yet I had won. I would stand before him and show him I fought for him. If I looked as I did, how would he want to fight for me? He would not want to forgive me. How would he want to fight for me? The weight of the box was ever present in my mind. My blood thumped in my palm, hot against the cold. When I had held it from Aphrodite, still empty, it had grown warm to my touch on the journey, as most metals do, uncomfortably hot when I passed it to Persephone. But when she gave it back to me, it was ice cold. Holding it felt like frost on my skin, unnaturally cold. I assumed then the cream must have been filled with some godly magic cooling effect, that was part of the restoration in its power. It felt nice in my hands, and its freezing feel remained, even though I had held it for hours. No, it was more, or at least it felt like days. I could not tell time easily in this realm. I did not question this odd quality of the cream box, but my aching body, exhausted, bruised, and begging for relief, I thought, if Persephone had filled the whole case, surely Aphrodite wouldn't notice if I used just a little. If I ran my finger along the lid for that smear of lotion that is seldom used or missed. I trudged toward the rock, toward the portal, but my mind kept on at me, twisting with a pull toward the box, offering weak arguments to myself. I admit now that my victories had made me bold. Too bold. With the end in sight, I thought to slight the goddess further. To show she had failed to break me, that I had prevailed, a mere mortal over her. The temptation was too much. I opened the golden case. Black smoke burst in a tornado, spinning with grey swirls that swallowed the light. It rushed at me. Before I could leap back, it covered my eyes, filled my nose and throat both. I was overtaken by it. I could not breathe or cough. I tried to blink, but it all stopped. All faded, and there was nothing, just blackness.
Psyche was tricked. My mother had set a trap, one I had not seen coming. I had tried to warn her. She was right. I had no wounds that had not healed on the flight to Aphrodite's. All physical ailments were fading, all but my heart. When I heard she was in the hall, she had come for me. I was still angry. I kept to my room, sick at the idea of seeing her after what she had just done. But her prayers that first night. I had been able to tune out her voice when I left, covering her words with the prayers of others. But her locked only rooms away. I could not block her out. I tried, but her voice to my divine senses felt like she was screaming into my mind. I had no choice but to listen. Aphrodite's lackeys were posted at both our doors, for I did not receive the warm welcome I had expected. My mother knew it all. Coupled with the fact I disobeyed orders, she was less than pleased. My mother no longer trusted me, and she lied, of course. Always her sweet mask, saying it was for my healing and my safety. But it was all for her own ends. My betrayal by falling for the mortal she despised, it had hurt. But such was our way. We had betrayed each other time and again. Still, my mother would prefer to punish me up close. Her fake niceties are always ways to tighten the leash. My mother feigned hurt on my behalf, pretending we had not heard her personal hate of the girl, and so no one commented. She babbled about only wanting to punish Psyche for the pain she had caused me, citing the burns and dagger as a full assassination attempt on a god. Aphrodite's face was in a wide, sinister smile. She knew I could not object or argue against that. Zeus would agree with Aphrodite. Any god would. She should be made an example of. Though she hurt me, I did not wish her dead. In her prayers I heard her reasons, her side of it all, the regrets and fear, the fate of her sisters that paid for their crimes. She was here for me, to fight for me. I longed to forgive her, but my anger was still plain. I wanted to believe her, but I needed to see it. I had trusted her before, and she had failed me. I would not go on word alone again. But that smile of Aphrodite's, I knew what it meant. Death, one way or another. I had to stop her setting on an execution. I fixed my mischievous smile on, and nodded to my mother, agreeing. She was right. Psyche had to be punished, but why make it quick? After all she had done to me, to us, would it not be better to torture her for a while first? Set her 4 trials, each more difficult than the last. Show her for the unworthy mortal she is, compared to the goddess she tried to replace. Better yet, lull her into a false sense of security. Give her hope with early success, and then snatch it away. It will make her demise all the sweeter. It was so easy to slip back into my knavish role, offering plans wrapped with compliments, and she lapped it all up, quickly claiming the idea as her own, with tweaks, of course. I knew she longed to kill Psyche. This is why the seeds were set, so that my mother might return home and kill her then. Expecting the girl to be in tears, Aphrodite's plan was to fill the room with seeds, representing the stolen sacrifice Psyche had received, so she could choke on them. Poetic in a way, but my mother did not count on Psyche's resilience, nor my hand tipping the scales. I used my divinity, my godly gift, to make the ants love Psyche. Fueled by it, they came up from the ground and sorted the seeds. Once they were finished, I released them of their bonds of love, and they went to be as ordinary ants once more. For the other tasks, I had heard her prayers, but not forgiven her yet. I wanted her to fight for me. And here she was, with impossible tasks and challenges that were fatal. I could not let Aphrodite crush Psyche. I helped her where I could, only to even the playing field, but she must still come to the field, to give my girl a true chance, even after all I had suffered. I was the voice inside the reed, guiding her to brambles and ways from the goring golden sheep. The eagle was no work of mine, but the tower from which she meant to throw herself, I was the voice coming from inside. She was brave enough to jump. I admire her spirit. It was flourishing under the pressure, always enduring, and this is when I felt my spark of love again. It had never truly left, but was clouded with anger and pain. But a devotion to the trials, her will and spirit, all of it was for me. It made me want to trust her again. I told her the instructions, for I had heard my mother's plot. I gave her each step that I could think of. I thought I knew all of Aphrodite's tricks. I had not won her truly. She feigned acceptance, but did not buy my false reactions to Psyche's victories. I did not wear my mask as I once had, and she had the upper hand. I believed myself cleverer than she. With her impossible tasks being easily completed, it is easy to see how she did not believe me. But Aphrodite did not like to lose, and she installed a surefire way to win for all. She had written a note to Persephone, placed it in the empty box. The queen of the underworld adored a good challenge for love. She did as she was bid, and placed no cream but a dark smoke of sleep-filled death inside. When Psyche left, Aphrodite began her celebration early. It took a day of heavy drinking wine mixed with ambrosia, and in her drunk state she began to brag of her victory, announcing the clever twist of the note to the whole hall. I left then, weaved around the crowd to the closet window, and leapt. As I raced to the entrance, swiftly through the skies, it was as if I could feel exactly when the box opened, when she fell into darkness. Something burst inside me, and adrenaline coursed through me, my speed greater than ever before. I flew to the cave in record time. Shot through the cave, I tucked in my wings for split seconds, careful not to clip the stone, and crashed into the wall. It shifted before my sight, and I saw her. It stopped me in my tracks. She was laying there, still and cold. Her glassy eyes stared up at the skies, mere meters away from the portal. I dived to her body and crashed into the sands. I scrambled to touch her cheek. As my skin met hers, I felt the smoke pulsing, the unnatural death swirling inside her. My body thrummed, and I channeled my power, used my will to push and pull at the hurricane. I coaxed and then tugged, like sucking venom from a wound. With focus and a blast of light, the smoke came blasting through the air in a stream. It rushed and flowed straight back into the open waiting box inside her. As it flowed between them, my eyes were ever drawn inland, to the horizon in the heart of the underworld. There I saw the three women, the Fates. First, with a spindle, she held a thread that she fed into the spinning wheel of the second. The last of the three held sheets, but put them away in a leather sheath. She brought out the bright gold thread of unending life, the thread of the lives of the gods, eternal and forever being spun. They spoke together as one. This is the fate the you and the universe has decided. Let it be so. It is now. It shall be, and it always was, being the caterpillar. She has been in her chrysalis, and will emerge the butterfly. Bring her to the gods. She is, shall be, and always was, one of us. The image of the fates faded, and I looked down as the last of the smoke cleared. The box snapped shut behind it. And in that same instant, Psyche jumped up in my arms with a rasping grasp. Her eyes snapped open wide. I held her closer and tighter than I ever had. I wrapped my wings around us both, shielding us from the world. We stayed like that, on the wet sands, and we breathed each other in. I leant in to kiss her as she cried. I took her into my arms fully and carried her into the skies. Through the portal, I spun us gracefully through the cave and into the mortal world again. Apollo saw us on his chariot as we passed. Psyche giggled and waved as we soared towards the mountains. Over the clouds, we dipped down to glide over mighty Olympus. We flew into the palace, racing through the columned halls. We burst into the throne room. I flew above the crowds and saw that nearly all of the gods were gathered. All but Aphrodite. We soared above them and came to land at the foot of the stairs to the throne. The king of the gods stood from his throne, and I dropped Psyche to her feet. She gripped my arm to stand, still weak from the trials. I bowed deeply and begged Zeus to hear my case. He smiled and nodded, with a twinkle in his eye. The court and king both loved a good story, so I told them the tale of Eros and Psyche. From the moment I saw her to how we flew to stand there before them all that day. Zeus smiled and laughed. Who did we think had sent the eagle? All the court burst into laughter. Zeus boomed out to all. Fate had decreed a new goddess be born today. He had watched our lives, supported our union, seen the kind brave hearts of us both, a love that is strong and true. Determined against the impossible, and through it all we had endured together. He summoned a cupbearer to bring forth the ambrosia, and all cheered. Psyche looked nervous, and I squeezed her hand. I took the golden chalice. The liquid inside glowed so brightly, the gold paled in comparison. I brought the cup to Psyche's lips. As she drank, a glow began to emanate from her skin. All the wounds and ailments sank away. Life revitalized inside her. The glow brightened until it was a bright white light that covered all of her. It burst in a wave through the room. Sparks left to dance and fizzle out in its wake. The courts gasped and applauded with cheers. Psyche stood, restored and transformed. Her beauty no more than before, but her power. It oozed off her in mighty waves. Her eyes were the only part left still burning bright with light. 3 voices echoed out of her. I am the goddess of mortal spirit. The glow faded to her brown, but gold flecks remained. She embraced me, and I heard it again. The heart beat strong and clear of my Psyche, but it did not beat alone. The hummingbird patter of the child from before, the child now restored as she had been, perhaps too with the power and will she now embodied. Zeus clapped, and the celebration began. Lavish feasts and ambrosia aplenty, food, games, dancing in the week-long happiness. we performed the proper wedding rituals and were united before the gods. Psyche and I enjoyed scheming to match people through the days of drunken haze. After our wedding, bliss cooled into happy routine. I went back to my mother and flattered and plotted once more, earning her favour back with mischief, tricks, and love for all. Gossip and salacious affairs she could not resist and forgave me quickly, as is our way. But her rage with Psyche took more time. She got many of her followers back. The true worshippers of beauty now have all come crawling back. So she thinks, but Psyche asked her city and all those who worshipped her in life to turn back to Aphrodite, the true paragon of beauty. An olive branch, and it oiled the clogs, both flattery and assurance.
No, Aphrodite, my dear mother-in-law, I would never claim such a title, and never should have let others fool me. I was always meant for spirit. None could compare to your beauty, the finest in the universe.
Of course she loved it. She happily calls her daughter now, but this would come in time. Psyche and I went back to our home, where she always kept a candle burning on the nightstand, even through the night. She vowed we should never be in darkness again. And the fate of our child, our daughter, Hedone, that is a tale for another time.